Bienvenidos a Aprendo English, el podcast diseñado para facilitar tu aprendizaje y práctica del inglés. Cada episodio ofrece una inmersión profunda en temas específicos de tu interés, ayudándote a comprender el idioma de manera más efectiva. En nuestro primer episodio, exploraremos la importancia de la amistad y el valor de compartir. Así que, empecemos.
All right, let's dive into the heart of connection. We've got some really interesting stuff you sent in, focusing on friendship and sharing. Ready to uncover those heartwarming insights. I'm excited to see what we find.
Absolutely. I mean, who doesn't love a good deep dive into something as universal as friendship and sharing? These are such fundamental parts of the human experience. It'll be really interesting to see what we can learn.
Yeah, you're right. It's something everyone can relate to. This piece paints friendship as so much more than just hanging out. It's a real source of strength, like a refuge in a storm kind of thing.
Yeah.
But what does that actually look like in real life? Like, how does it play out day to day?
Well, what I find interesting is that this refuge idea isn't just about having someone to lean on when things get tough. It's more about how friends actively contribute to our well-being, like how they help us grow. They can give us a sense of belonging, and a sounding board for our crazy ideas that might even give us a little nudge to try something new, something outside our comfort zone. It's a really dynamic process. It's not just passive companionship.
That makes me think about when I was thinking about a major career change. I was so nervous, but my friends, they helped me see my own strengths, reminded me of things I'd accomplished in the past. And honestly, their belief in me, that gave me the courage to actually go for it, to make that leap.
That's a perfect example of how powerful these supportive relationships can be, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about feeling good. It's about them actually equipping us to face challenges and make bold choices, like changing careers.
Totally. So this piece also talks about sharing. And it's obviously not just about splitting dessert or lending a book. There's got to be something deeper here.
Right. Yeah, it's about sharing things that are less tangible, but just as valuable, like time, experiences, knowledge, even emotions. And it's important to remember that this kind of sharing goes both ways. It can deepen empathy and strengthen relationships in a way material things just can't.
I get how swapping stories or travel experiences can bring people closer, but what about sharing knowledge? Or even tougher, difficult emotions? How does that build stronger connections? It feels kind of counterintuitive, honestly.
Well, think about it this way. When you confide in a friend about something you're insecure about, or a fear you have, and they respond with understanding instead of judgment, that creates a deeper level of trust and intimacy. It's like saying, this is a vulnerable part of me, and I trust you with it. And then that opens the door for them to do the same, to be vulnerable with you, which deepens the bond even more.
So it's about creating a space where both people feel safe to be their true selves. And it's that shared vulnerability that actually strengthens the connection.
Yeah.
There's a study mentioned in the piece where couples who regularly share their feelings reported being more satisfied in their relationships. Maybe that's a real-world example of this in action.
Absolutely. It really highlights how being emotionally transparent can be a key ingredient for building stronger, more fulfilling relationships, not just romantic ones either. And when it comes to sharing knowledge, imagine a friend helping you with a tech issue, or offering career advice based on what they've learned. Their generosity not only helps you solve the problem, but it also builds trust and shows they really care about you.
Knowing why strong connections are good is one thing, but how do we actually get better at building them? This piece gives some specific tips. Let's get into those, like a masterclass in connection.
Right. I like that. A masterclass in connection. And I think a good place to start is with the foundation, being a good friend.
Right, being a good friend. The piece talks about stuff like being a good listener, being empathetic, offering support, celebrating each other's successes. But how can we actually do those things instead of just nodding along? What does being a good listener actually look like in a real conversation?
Being a good listener, it goes beyond just hearing the words, right? It's about picking up on the emotions behind what someone's saying. So instead of immediately jumping in with advice or trying to fix things, try reflecting back what you're hearing, like, it sounds like you're feeling really frustrated with this. Am I getting that right? That shows you're really engaged, trying to understand their perspective.
That makes a lot of sense. And I bet it makes the other person feel heard and validated, which is probably more helpful than a solution they didn't ask for.
Exactly. And when it comes to offering support, remember, grand gestures aren't always necessary. Sometimes just a simple check-in, a thoughtful text, or just being present, like truly present, offering a listening ear, that can make a huge difference.
So it's a small, consistent acts of caring that really build a strong foundation for friendship.
Precisely. It's not always about the big things, the sweeping gestures. It's about showing up in those everyday moments and letting your friends know you're there.
This piece also highlights being generous. And as we said, it's about so much more than just money or things. How can we be generous with our time, our knowledge, our resources in ways that genuinely strengthen those connections?
Well, I think it's about tapping into your own strengths and offering help in ways that feel authentic to you. Maybe you're super organized and you could help a friend declutter their closet, or you're a great cook and you could share a recipe they've been dying to try.
I love that. It's like each of us has these superpowers we can share with our friends, and those acts of service can be really meaningful ways to show we care. But what about generosity with our time? I feel like that's the one I struggle with the most. There aren't enough hours in the day.
You're right. Time is precious. But being intentional about how we spend it with loved ones really says a lot. Instead of mindlessly scrolling through social media, maybe schedule a regular coffee date with a friend, or set aside some dedicated time for a phone call, or even just being fully present during the time you do have together, putting away distractions, really engaging in the moment.
Right. It's a reminder that even when we're busy, we can still make choices, conscious choices, to prioritize those connections.
Exactly. And those choices, those little acts of generosity can really make a big difference in strengthening our bonds and making our lives richer.
Okay, this next tip might be a little tougher for some people, myself included. Being vulnerable. This piece talks about opening up, sharing our thoughts and feelings. But for someone like me, who tends to keep things bottled up, that feels terrifying. How do we approach vulnerability in a way that feels safe and manageable, not overwhelming or awkward?
You've hit on a really common challenge. It's important to remember that vulnerability is a process, not a switch we flip on and off, right? It's about starting small and building trust over time. Instead of immediately diving into your deepest fears, try sharing a little worry or a moment of doubt with a friend you feel safe with and see how they respond. If they meet you with empathy and understanding, it can give you the confidence to open up a little more next time.
So it's like dipping our toes in the vulnerability pool instead of diving head first, and choosing the right people to be vulnerable with, the ones who've earned our trust and have shown they can handle it with care. That's crucial too.
Absolutely. It's about finding those safe spaces, those safe harbors where we can practice vulnerability without feeling judged or exposed.
The piece also suggests joining group activities, things like clubs or groups or activities, as a way to nurture connections. How does this connect to the bigger theme of connection?
Think of it as expanding your circle of connections beyond just your existing friendships. When you join a group that's centered around a shared hobby or interest, a book club, maybe a volunteer organization, you instantly have something in common with the other people there. That shared interest, it gives you a natural starting point for conversation. And those initial interactions can sometimes blossom into something deeper, something more meaningful.
Right. It's like you're automatically part of a team, so it can feel less intimidating to connect with new people. And who knows, you might even discover a hidden talent or passion you never knew you had.
Exactly. It's about opening ourselves up to new experiences, new connections, things that can enrich our lives in ways we never expected.
The last tip in this piece focuses on gratitude. The idea of expressing appreciation for our friends and the support they give us. Why is gratitude so important when we're talking about connection?
Well, gratitude, it plays a really powerful role in strengthening those relationships. Think about it. When you express appreciation for something your friend did, or a quality you admire in them, you're acknowledging their value in your life. You're making them feel seen, appreciated. It's not just about saying thank you for the big favors. It's about noticing and acknowledging those little everyday acts of kindness that often go unnoticed.
Right. Things like thanking a friend for just listening, for making you laugh when you needed it most, or just being there for you through thick and thin. It's about making those small moments count.
Exactly. It's about cultivating a mindset of appreciation, letting our friends know that their presence in our lives, it really matters. And here's a bonus. The more you practice gratitude, the more you notice things to be grateful for, which can create this positive upward spiral in your relationships.
This all makes so much sense, but there's one more point in here that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. It's the idea that strong connections actually fuel our personal motivation. It seems counterintuitive. Shouldn't focusing on my own goals be my top priority? How does shifting that focus outward towards building relationships actually help me achieve my aspirations?
I know, it might seem a bit counterintuitive, but strong connections, they can really provide a powerful foundation of support that helps us reach our full potential. Think of it this way. Let's say you're training for a marathon. Having a friend who's also training can provide accountability and encouragement, which makes those early morning runs a lot easier to get through.
So it's like having a built-in cheering section, people who understand the challenges and celebrate the victories with you, which makes the whole journey more enjoyable and, more motivating.
Exactly. And beyond the emotional support, friends can also be a huge source of inspiration. Seeing people you admire pursuing their own passions, overcoming obstacles, that can be incredibly motivating. It shows you what's possible and might inspire you to push your own boundaries a bit further.
So their success can become our inspiration, almost like a blueprint for what we can achieve too. That makes a lot of sense. But is there anything beyond inspiration and support that makes connections so motivating?
Absolutely. There's also this sense of responsibility that comes with being part of a supportive community. When you know that people are counting on you, they believe in you, they're invested in your success, it can give you that extra push to keep going, even when things get tough.
It's like knowing that if you give up, you're not just letting yourself down, you're letting down the people who are rooting for you. That can be a really powerful motivator.
Exactly. And finally, there's the pure joy of shared success. Achieving a long-held goal, that's fantastic on its own. But sharing that victory with friends who are genuinely excited for you, it makes it even sweeter. It reinforces that feeling of belonging, of being interconnected, and makes the whole experience more meaningful and rewarding.
Wow, this has been so insightful. It's really changing the way I think about connections. It's not just something nice to have. It's a vital source of strength, motivation, and just overall well-being.
I couldn't agree more. It's woven into who we are, how we thrive in the world. And by understanding its power, we can make more conscious choices to nurture those connections and unlock their incredible potential.
So we've been talking about all these amazing benefits of connection. It's almost like we've unlocked some secret code to a more fulfilling life. But how does all this relate to your life? This stuff is great in theory, but I'm wondering how we can make these ideas more practical and tangible for you, like in your everyday experiences.
That's a great question. I think it starts with how we view connection. A lot of times we treat it like a luxury, something nice to have if we have the time, but really it's as important to our well-being as like food, water, shelter.
Right. It's not just an extra, it's a basic need.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we know if we're actually getting enough connection nutrition, so to speak? Are there signs that we might be deficient?
Connection nutrition, I like that. And just like with a nutritional deficiency, there are warning signs that we're not getting enough. Feeling lonely all the time or isolated, that's a big one. But it can also show up as a lack of purpose or trouble concentrating, maybe even increased anxiety.
It's like our minds and bodies are trying to tell us something's not right, something's out of balance. So if we're feeling connection deficient, what's the solution? How do we start incorporating more of that vital nutrition into our lives?
Well, it's about making a conscious effort to prioritize connection, even in little ways. Instead of another night of Netflix by yourself, maybe call up a friend or really engage in a conversation with your family at dinner. Put down the phone, ask questions you genuinely want to know the answer to, really listen to what they have to say.
I'm hearing a lot about intentionality. It's not about magically having more time. It's about choosing to prioritize connection in the time we do have.
Exactly. And those small intentional acts of connection can make a huge difference in the long run.
This material you shared also mentions this idea of community, how being part of something bigger can boost motivation and purpose. It sounds lovely, but how do we actually find our place in that big picture?
It starts with figuring out what lights you up. What are you passionate about? What special skills or talents do you have that you could share? What causes or issues really speak to you?
It's like we each have these unique threads that we can weave into this big community tapestry, right?
I love that analogy. And once you've figured out what those threads are, those passions and skills, start exploring ways to connect with others who share them. There are tons of organizations, groups, initiatives out there doing amazing work. Find the ones that align with what you care about and jump in.
I think some people might feel overwhelmed by the idea of finding their place in all of that. Any advice for those who are a little hesitant to take that first step?
Start small. It doesn't have to be this huge time commitment or some dramatic life change. Volunteer at a local charity for a couple hours a month, go to a community meeting, or even just strike up a conversation with someone who's involved in something you care about. It's often those small steps that lead to the most meaningful connections, the biggest sense of purpose.
I like that. Takes the pressure off, makes it seem more doable. It's not about being perfect or having all the answers. It's about showing up, being open, and willing to contribute in whatever way feels right to you.
Exactly. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. Be patient with yourself and trust that the connections you need will show up in your life.
This conversation is making me realize that, building and maintaining connections, it's not always easy. Life can throw some curveballs that make it hard to prioritize relationships.
You're so right. We all go through times when connection feels more challenging. Maybe it's a demanding job, a health issue, family responsibilities, or just the everyday busyness of life that pulls us away from nurturing those relationships.
And sometimes it goes even deeper than that. Past hurts, maybe social anxiety, or just a lack of confidence can make it scary to reach out and connect.
Yeah.
For someone who's dealing with those hurdles, what advice do you have? How can they navigate those challenges and find that sense of connection, even when it feels really tough?
Well, I think acknowledging the challenges is a good first step, and being kind to ourselves in the process. It's okay to feel overwhelmed or unsure of where to start, or even scared to put ourselves out there. We're all human. Those feelings are totally valid.
That's a good point. We tend to beat ourselves up for not being better at connecting, which just makes it harder to reach out and connect in the first place.
Right.
It's like we create this self-fulfilling prophecy of disconnection. Instead, let's try to be compassionate with ourselves and remember we're not alone in these struggles.
That reminds me of something else from the material you sent in. It talked about how important it is to reach out for support when we need it. Maybe talking to a trusted friend or family member, seeking guidance from a therapist, or even joining a support group where you can connect with others who get it, who understand what you're going through.
Those are all great resources, and sometimes simply saying to a friend, "Hey, I'm struggling with this," that can be a powerful first step in rebuilding those connections.
It's like we're giving ourselves permission to be vulnerable and inviting others in to meet us in that space of shared humanity.
And remember, connection goes both ways. It's not just about receiving support, it's also about offering it. Sometimes the most meaningful connections happen when we step outside of ourselves and focus on being there for someone else who might be having a tough time.
So it's not just about what we can get from connections, but also what we can give.
Exactly, and it's often those acts of giving, those moments of shared vulnerability and support that create the strongest bonds.
Kind of a paradox, right?
Yeah.
The more we give, the more we receive.
Precisely. And those connections, they often blossom in the most unexpected places. Maybe it's a chance encounter with a stranger who becomes a friend, or shared experience in a community setting that sparks a new passion, or even reconnecting with an old friend that brings unexpected joy and support.
It's like we need to be open to those serendipitous moments. Trust that the connections we need will find their way into our lives as long as we create space for them.
Couldn't agree more.
This has been so eye-opening. I'm starting to see connection in a whole new light. It's not just a social thing. It's this foundational piece of a fulfilling and purposeful life.
It's wonderful to see that shift in perspective. It's a reminder that we're not meant to do this alone. Connection, it's the thread that binds us together, the fuel that keeps us going, and the source of our greatest joys, our deepest sense of purpose.
As we wrap up our deep dive into all this great stuff you sent in, I'm curious about your final thoughts on the power of connection. What's the one message you want our listener to take away from all of this?
You know, if there's one thing I really hope sticks with you from all of this, it's that connection is a choice. It's not something that just magically happens. It's a decision, an active one we make every single day to put those relationships first, to nurture our communities, to be a part of that bigger human experience.
Yeah, like we're the ones building our own connection destiny, choosing to build those bridges instead of walls, right? Yeah. But what about those times when life just gets in the way, when connection feels impossible? Like a distant dream.
Well, it's important to remember that it's never too late to start building. No matter what point you're at in life, no matter the challenges, you always have the power to choose connection. It might seem daunting at first, but even tiny steps can make a huge difference.
That makes me think of something from what you sent. It said even the smallest act of kindness can have this ripple effect, reaching far beyond ourselves.
That's such a powerful thought. It really highlights how connected we all are. Our actions, no matter how small they seem, can touch so many lives. And the amazing thing is, it creates this cycle, a positive one. The more we connect, the more we realize how connected we all are, which makes us want to keep those connections going.
It's like we're all threads in this huge tapestry, and every active connection makes the whole fabric stronger. Speaking of connections, I'm curious about how they relate to personal growth. How does nurturing our connections actually help us grow as individuals?
Well, connection is a powerful tool for growth, It gives us a safe space to explore different parts of ourselves, to try on new ideas and ways of thinking, even discover hidden talents. It's like having this whole team of supportive coaches cheering you on while you're figuring things out.
So it's not just about feeling good or having people to support you. It's about those relationships actually helping you become a better version of yourself. But growth can be tough, even scary at times. How does a connection help with those challenging parts?
When we have strong connections, we're more likely to step out of our comfort zone, to take risks, face those challenges head on. Like having a safety net, it allows us to be more brave, experiment more, knowing that even if we fall, we'll have people there to catch us.
That reminds me of the saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
I love that. It really captures how important connections are for growth. We can do amazing things by ourselves, but with those supportive relationships pushing us forward, encouraging us to keep going, even when it's hard, we can go so much further than we ever thought possible.
This whole conversation has been so inspiring. It's given me a lot to think about in terms of my own connections. As we wrap up, I want to go back to a question I asked earlier. What's the one takeaway message you want our listener to leave with today?
The message I hope really resonates is that connection isn't a luxury. It's a fundamental part of being human. It's vital to our well-being, our motivation, our sense of purpose, our ability to truly thrive in the world. And the best part is, it's something we can actively cultivate, nurture, and strengthen every single day.
It's like we have this incredible power within us. The power to create connections that not only make our own lives better, but also make the world a brighter, more compassionate, more connected place.
That's beautifully put. And to our listener, we encourage you to embrace that power, nurture those connections, reach out to someone you care about, lend a helping hand. And remember, even the smallest act of kindness can create a ripple effect that makes the world a better place.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights with us today. This has been such an enlightening conversation.
The pleasure was all mine. I always enjoy these deep dives.
And to our listener, thank you for joining us as we explore the power of connection. We hope you've learned something valuable and feel inspired to connect more deeply in your own life. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. We are all connected, and by choosing connection, we create a brighter future for ourselves and for the world.
Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and keep those conversations going.
We'll see you on our next deep dive.